The acrid, unmistakable, sickening stench of burning plastic and scorched, melting rubber ripped through the otherwise crisp, clean fragrance of the late autumn air. A scent Michael Ramirez knew, with a chilling, visceral intimacy that settled like ice in the pit of his stomach. It was the olfactory signature of destruction, of malicious violation, a smell he had encountered too many times in his long, demanding career. He was in his garage, methodically sorting through specialized rescue equipment, a familiar Saturday morning ritual, when his son, Leo's voice, usually bright, buoyant, and filled with a 12-year-old's irrepressible enthusiasm, cut through the quiet suburban morning, sharp, with a primal terror that lanced straight into Mike's heart, stopping it cold. "Dad, Dad, no, oh no, Dad, my chair. My chair." Mike moved his body, reacting before his mind could fully process the horror in Leo's voice. His years as a firefighter, now fire chief for the city of Oak Haven, propelled him forward with a deeply ingrained reflexive urgency, an instinct honed by countless emergencies, by the need to act first and analyze later when lives were on the line. He burst from the side door of the garage onto the driveway of their modest, well-kept home in the Oakwood Creek subdivision. The sight that greeted him there under the placid blue sky stopped his breath, stole the air from his lungs. Leo, his beloved son, a boy who navigated the world with a quiet courage and unwavering spirit that humbled Mike daily, was standing precariously, his slight frame braced against the family minivan, his face a mask of utter disbelief, raw anguish, and dawning horror. A few feet away, his custom-built high-tech electric blue wheelchair, Leo's legs, his freedom, his cherished independence, a lifeline that represented so much more than mere mobility, was engulfed in angry, voracious orange flames, thick, oily black smoke billowing upwards, staining the clear autumn sky. For a split, surreal second, Mike's mind simply refused to process the scene. An accident, a catastrophic electrical fault in the chair's complex motor or battery system. He was a fire investigator by training after all. He knew such things, though rare, were possible. Then his practiced analytical eyes registered the small, telltale, iridescent puddle of accelerant still shimmering, unevaporated, at the base of the inferno, the unnatural way the flames licked too eagerly, too rapidly, consuming the specialized materials with a malevolent intensity. This was no accident. This was deliberate. Someone, some hateful, cowardly individual, had intentionally set his disabled son's wheelchair on fire. Leo, are you okay? Did you see anyone? Did anyone hurt you?" Mike's voice was rough, gravelly, his years of training kicking in, pushing past the immediate searing, white-hot rage that threatened to consume him to overwhelm his professional composure. He spun on his heel, grabbed the heavy-duty fire extinguisher mounted just inside the garage door, a precaution he insisted on in every home he'd ever lived in. His movements swift, sure, and economical, attacking the base of the flames with practiced efficiency. Leo, tears streaming unchecked down his pale face, could only shake his head, his small body trembling violently. I just came out to get it, to go to the park, and it was just on fire." He pointed a shaky, accusatory finger across the quiet, manicured street. "Mrs. Hoskins, she was watching from her window, Dad. Just watching. And she smiled. She smiled at me." Brenda Hoskins. The name uttered in Leo's broken, terrified whisper ignited a fresh, deeper wave of fury in Mike, a cold, hard, implacable rage that settled deep in his bones. Mrs. Hoskins, with her perfectly manicured, unnaturally green lawn, her surgically precise, ruler-straight hedges, and her venomous, thinly veiled disdain for anything or anyone in the Oakwood Creek subdivision that didn't meet her exacting, sterile, and frankly, joyless standards of community aesthetics and proper appearances. Leo, and by extension, his unsightly wheelchair, had long been a silent, then increasingly vocal target of her ill-concealed animosity, her petty tyrannies, her simmering resentment. Mike Ramirez was not just a father, not just a resident of Oakwood Creek. He was Fire Chief Michael Ramirez, a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to fighting fires, to understanding their complex anatomy, their insidious malice, their devastating aftermath. He knew this fire. He knew its intent. He knew its signature. and he knew with a chilling absolute certainty that Brenda Hoskins, in her arrogance and hatred, had just crossed a line from petty neighborhood tyrant and bitter busybody to dangerous, felonious criminal. The fire extinguisher hissed, spewing a cloud of chemical dust, smothering the flames, reducing the once vibrant chair to a blackened, twisted, grotesque metal skeleton. But it couldn't smother the inferno of resolve, now burning with an Arctic fury within him. This wasn't just an attack on an expensive piece of property. It was a direct, hateful attack on his son's very identity and freedom. It was an act of profound hate, of calculated cruelty. And Brenda Hoskins, Mike suspected, had absolutely no idea who or what she had just provoked. Life in Oakwood Creek had been for the most part the quiet, peaceful suburban idyll Mike and his wife Sarah had sought when they moved there 5 years ago, hoping for a supportive community for their family. Good schools for Leo, safe tree-lined streets, a sense of belonging. Leo, born with spina bifida, was a remarkably bright, resilient, and popular kid, his spirit uncrushed by his physical challenges. His customized electric blue wheelchair, a marvel of modern engineering that had cost more than a small car and had taken months of battling with insurance companies to secure, gave him the mobility to participate fully in school, to play adaptive sports with his friends, to live a life as rich, active, and full as any other 12-year-old boy's. Mike, by nature, a private man, rarely brought his demanding, high-profile job home. His neighbors in their quiet cul-de-sac knew him simply as Mike Ramirez, Leo's dad. The quiet, friendly guy who kept his lawn neat, was always ready with a helping hand or a friendly wave, and occasionally smelled faintly of smoke. Few, if any, in their immediate vicinity probably registered him as Chief Ramirez, the man responsible for the fire safety emergency response and arson investigation services for the entire sprawling city of Oak Haven. Brenda Hoskins certainly hadn't. Brenda Hoskins, however, a woman who seemed to thrive on discontent and control, had apparently made it her personal mission to disrupt their family's peace, to make their lives as uncomfortable as possible. From the very moment the Ramirezes had installed a subtle, unobtrusive, and entirely HOA-approved ramp leading to their front door, Hoskins had been a persistent, insidious source of friction. Her campaign of harassment had started with passive-aggressive comments whispered to other neighbors, comments that always found their way back to Mike and Sarah, about those people and their unsightly medical paraphernalia cluttering up the neighborhood. It quickly escalated. The first direct confrontation had occurred 3 months prior, an incident that still made Mike's blood boil when he recalled it. Hoskins had accosted Sarah in their own driveway as she was helping Leo transfer from his chair into the specially adapted family van for a doctor's appointment. Mrs. Ramirez. Hoskins had begun, her voice dripping with a false saccharine sweetness that didn't quite conceal the venom beneath. I do so hate to be a bother, and I know you have your challenges, but that contraption. She gestured vaguely with a delicate wave of her perfectly manicured hand towards Leo's wheelchair, which was temporarily parked on the driveway beside the van's deployed ramp. It really is rather an eyesore when it's left out like that, isn't it? It quite ruins the aesthetic harmony of our lovely street, you know. And property values are such a concern for all of us in these uncertain times. Sarah, normally a woman of immense patience and grace, had felt a surge of protective maternal anger. Mrs. Hoskins, she'd replied, her voice tight but controlled, that contraption, as you so charmingly call it, is my son's wheelchair. It is essential for his mobility, for his independence, for his very life. And I assure you, we do not leave it out, any more than is absolutely necessary for him to live his life. Well, perhaps it could be stored more discreetly. Hoskins had pressed her smile fixed, not reaching her cold, calculating eyes. In the garage, perhaps, or covered with a tasteful tarp, out of public view at least. We all have to make certain accommodations for the good of the community, for the greater good, don't we? His wheelchair is not an accommodation. We make Mrs. Hoskins. Sarah had replied, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed outrage. It is a part of him, a part of his life, and we will continue to use it as needed where needed. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have an appointment. Hoskins' carefully constructed veneer of civility had cracked, then revealing the bitterness beneath. Well, I never. Some people simply have no consideration for their neighbors, no sense of community responsibility. She'd stalked off, muttering loudly enough to be heard about HOA covenants, maintaining standards, and the decline of the neighborhood. After that watershed incident, the harassment had become more pointed, more malicious, though always cunningly deniable. Anonymous typed notes left in their mailbox, complaining about unsightly clutter on their property, clearly referring to the ramp, and on occasion, Leo's adaptive bicycle. Leo's brightly colored basketball accidentally left near the curb for an hour had mysteriously disappeared, only to be found later, by a sympathetic neighbor, stuffed into a public trash can 3 blocks away. Then, just a week before the fire, a more sinister event, one of the wheelchair's expensive specialized puncture-resistant tires, had been deliberately viciously punctured while the chair sat on their covered porch for a mere 10 minutes as Leo transitioned inside after school. Mike, his senses honed by years of sifting through fire debris, had found a small, sharp, wickedly pointed piece of metal embedded deep in the tire. It looked suspiciously like a deliberately broken-off nail file. He had reported it to the Oakwood Creek HOA management company along with his strong suspicions about Brenda Hoskins, but had been met with a dismissive bureaucratic response about lack of concrete evidence and a patronizing suggestion that it was probably just children playing pranks. Mike had also spoken to Hoskins directly after that incident, a calm but firm, unequivocal warning to leave his family, and especially his son's property alone. She had denied everything, of course, her eyes glittering with a strange, triumphant malice that had deeply unsettled him. He had then installed a new high-resolution security camera overlooking their driveway and front porch, but in a lapse, he now cursed himself, for he hadn't yet adjusted its angle to fully cover the exact spot on the porch where the chair had been when its tire was slashed. He had meant to, but life and the demands of his job had intervened. The smoldering, ruined skeletal frame of Leo's wheelchair was a grotesque, heartbreaking monument to Brenda Hoskins's escalating hatred, her profound lack of empathy. The specialized gel cushion, designed to prevent pressure sores, the ergonomic supports custom molded to Leo's body, the complex joystick control system that gave him such nuanced command, all melted, warped, irretrievably destroyed. Mike knelt beside the wreckage, his firefighter's training overriding his paternal grief for a moment, his eyes scanning, noting the way the fire had burned hot and fast, the telltale signs of a liquid accelerant. He could smell it faintly beneath the acrid chemical scent of the extinguisher residue, likely a common petroleum distillate like lighter fluid, or gasoline easily obtainable, easily ignited. "Dad." Leo's voice was small, broken, filled with a despair that tore at Mike's soul. "My chair, my legs. How will I go to school? How will I play basketball?" Mike stood, pulling his trembling son into a fierce, protective hug, his own heart aching with a pain that was almost physical. "We'll get you a new one, Leo. A better one. A faster one. Don't you worry about that for a second, okay, buddy?" He looked across the street. Brenda Hoskins was no longer visible at her window. The pristine white blinds were drawn tight. Coward. He then said to Leo, his voice deliberately calm, "Son, I'm going to call the police. They'll investigate, but I'm not sure what they can do with just our word against hers. People like Mrs. Hoskins, they can be hard to deal with." He wanted Leo to understand the potential difficulties, but also to subtly plant the seed of his own perceived limitations in anyone who might be listening, especially Hoskins if she was. The first police car arrived within minutes, a young earnest officer named Miller, stepping out, his expression concerned as he took in the scene, the destroyed wheelchair, the distraught boy, the grim-faced father. "Chief Ramirez." "What happened here?" he asked, recognizing Mike from city functions, but clearly unsure of the full horrific context. Before Mike could respond, Brenda Hoskins, her performance obviously well rehearsed, emerged from her front door, a look of carefully cultivated profound concern etched on her face. "Oh, officer, thank goodness you're here," she called out, hurrying with surprising alacrity across her immaculate weed-free lawn. Such a terrible, shocking thing. That poor dear boy's chair, I saw the smoke from my kitchen window. I was just about to call 911 myself. Do you think it was some sort of electrical malfunction? These modern gadgets, all those wires and batteries, they can be so unreliable, can't they? So dangerous. She glanced at Leo with an expression that was clearly intended to convey deep pity, but came across as sickeningly patronizing, almost gloating. Mike felt a cold, lethal rage settle deep in his bones, a dangerous calm descending. He met Officer Miller's eyes, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Officer," his voice was quiet, professional, but with an underlying resonant tone of command that made Miller unconsciously stand a little straighter. "This was not an accident. This was a deliberate act of arson. Specifically, a targeted attack on my son's essential medical equipment, a piece of equipment vital for his mobility and independence." He pointed to the discolored patch of asphalt near the charred remains. "You can see the pore pattern of the liquid accelerant right there. Standard petroleum-based, I'd hazard a guess from the burn characteristics and the residue. The ignition was clearly deliberate, malicious, and targeted." Hoskins gasped theatrically, her hand flying to her chest. "Arson. Oh my heavens, here in Oakwood Creek. Who on earth would do such a monstrous, unthinkable thing? We live in such a safe, respectable neighborhood." Mike turned his gaze fully on her, his eyes like chips of blue ice. "My son Leo, who is 12 years old and has never lied to me in his life, indicated that he saw you, Mrs. Hoskins, watching from your front window while his chair was actively burning. He said you were smiling." Hoskins recoiled, as if physically struck her face, flushing a blotchy red. "Smiling. How dare he? How dare you? The poor child must be confused, traumatized. He's imagining things. I was horrified, shocked to my very core. I would never ever smile at such a terrible tragedy. That's a monstrous accusation." "Is that so, Mrs. Hoskins?" Mike said softly, his voice dangerously quiet. He then looked back at Officer Miller. "Officer, I am formally requesting a full and immediate arson investigation by the Oak Haven Fire Department's Arson Investigation Unit. As the fire chief for this city, I am declaring this an active crime scene. I need the on-duty fire marshal and my lead arson investigator, Captain Dave Evans, notified and en route immediately. We need to secure the scene, preserve all potential evidence." "Mrs. Hoskins," he fixed her with an unyielding, powerful stare that made her visibly flinch. "Given your well-documented history of harassment against my son and his use of this specific wheelchair, your previous attempts to have it removed from public view, and my son's direct statement that you were observing this fire with apparent satisfaction, you will be considered a person of significant interest in this investigation. I would strongly advise you not to leave your property, nor to dispose of any potential evidence until my investigators have had a chance to speak with you at length." The color drained completely instantly from Brenda Hoskins' carefully made-up face. The fire chief. The words hung in the crisp autumn air, heavy, ominous, and utterly devastating. Her eyes wide, with a dawning, horrified realization, darted from Mike's hard, implacable face to Officer Miller's suddenly very serious, respectful expression, then back to the blackened, twisted ruin of Leo's wheelchair. The smugness, the feigned concern, the arrogant condescension, all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a stark, uncomprehending terror. This wasn't just her annoying neighbor Mike, the quiet, unassuming father of the disabled boy next door. This was Fire Chief Michael Ramirez, the man in charge of every fire truck, every firefighter, every highly trained arson investigator in the entire city. And she, in her blind hatred and petty malice, had just torched his son's wheelchair on his own driveway. The enormity of her miscalculation, her catastrophic underestimation of the man she had targeted, began to crash down upon her. Captain Dave Evans, Mike's most trusted and experienced top arson investigator, a man renowned for his meticulousness and his uncanny ability to read the story, a fire left behind, arrived within 20 minutes, his specialized team in tow. The scene was quickly professionally cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. Evans, a grizzled, laconic veteran who had seen the worst of human depravity in his long career, listened grimly, his expression unreadable as Mike, in his official capacity as chief, briefed him. Mike's voice was tight with suppressed emotion, yet his observations about the fire's origin spread, and characteristics were precise, analytical, and professional. Neighbors had begun to gather at a respectful distance, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and morbid curiosity. Brenda Hoskins had retreated into her house, the pristine white blinds still drawn tight, but Mike had no doubt she was peering out her world, rapidly unraveling. The investigation moved with a speed, efficiency, and thoroughness that only a high-profile case with the direct personal involvement of the city's fire chief could command. Evans's team meticulously collected samples from the charred remnants of the wheelchair and the surrounding asphalt. They photographed, measured, and sketched the distinctive pore pattern Mike had initially identified. Officer Miller and his partner began a systematic canvass of the neighborhood, searching for any potential witnesses, though most like Mike himself had only been alerted by the sight of the smoke or by Leo's terrified cries. Mike had managed to get Leo inside, settled on the sofa with Sarah, who was pale, with a mixture of fury and fear, but was trying to remain calm and strong for their traumatized son. He then immediately checked his own security camera footage. The angle, as he'd feared, was frustratingly oblique, focused more on the family vehicles than the exact spot on the porch where the chair had been parked that morning. But it nevertheless captured a fleeting yet critically important glimpse, a figure, silhouette, and gait entirely consistent with Brenda Hoskins, moving quickly, furtively away from the edge of his property just moments before the first wisps of smoke became visible on the recording. It wasn't a clear facial shot, not definitive enough for an immediate arrest, but it was powerfully, damnably suggestive, especially when combined with Leo's statement. Captain Evans approached Mike after about an hour of intensive on-scene investigation. "Chief," he said, his voice low and serious, "we've got clear, unequivocal evidence of a liquid accelerant, likely a common petroleum distillate such as lighter fluid, or perhaps a paint thinner from the lab's preliminary field test on the swab samples. The burn patterns on what's left of the chair and the asphalt beneath are classic targeted ignition. There is absolutely no question this was a deliberate, malicious act of arson. Not electrical, not accidental." "Anything else, Dave?" Mike asked, his voice tight. Evans hesitated for a fraction of a second. "One of your neighbors, a Mrs. Henderson, from 2 doors down, a reliable witness by all accounts, came forward. Said she saw Mrs. Hoskins out in her own yard, much earlier this morning around 7:30 a.m. acting agitated, pacing back and forth. She specifically mentioned seeing Mrs. Hoskins carry a small, squarish metal can. The kind lighter fluid or charcoal starter often comes in from her garage, towards the side of her house that directly faces yours about 20 minutes or so before she herself noticed the smoke from your driveway. Get a formal signed statement from Mrs. Henderson immediately," Mike ordered, his voice like flint. "And then Dave lets you and I, along with Officer Miller, pay Mrs. Hoskins another visit. I think it's high time she had the opportunity to explain herself in detail." Brenda Hoskins did not take the subsequent official visit well. When confronted in her own meticulously decorated living room by Captain Evans and 2 uniformed police officers, with Fire Chief Michael Ramirez standing silently but imposingly in her doorway, her carefully constructed composure completely crumbled. She initially blustered, denied everything, vehemently accused them of harassment and intimidation. But as Captain Evans calmly, methodically, and relentlessly laid out the accumulating evidence, Mrs. Henderson's sworn witness statement, the definitive forensic analysis of the accelerant, the highly suggestive security camera footage, her own well-documented history of complaints and harassment targeting Leo and his wheelchair, her denials became weaker, her story riddled with blatant inconsistencies and panicked contradictions. I was just cleaning my barbecue grill this morning," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch when asked about the lighter fluid Mrs. Henderson had seen. "It must have been children. Yes, mischievous, unsupervised neighborhood children playing with matches. They're always running wild." At 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, Mrs. Hoskins, Captain Evans asked, his voice skeptical, his gaze unwavering. "Targeting a specific, very expensive and essential piece of medical equipment belonging to a disabled child you've repeatedly complained about, using a liquid accelerant to ensure it was thoroughly and completely destroyed. That's quite a sophisticated prank for children playing with matches. Wouldn't you agree?" Hoskins' eyes, wide with panic, darted towards Mike, who met her desperate gaze without flinching, his expression a mask of cold, hard, righteous anger. She saw no sympathy there, no mercy, only the unwavering, implacable promise of justice. The dam of her deceit, her hatred, her self-justification finally broke. He was always leaving it out. She burst out, tears of rage, frustration, and pathetic self-pity now streaming down her contorted face. That That ugly, monstrous chair, right there on their driveway, on their porch, where everyone in the neighborhood had to see it. It brought down the whole tone of our beautiful community. It was an affront. I asked them, I begged them to be more considerate, to keep it hidden, but they wouldn't listen. They just didn't care. It was an eyesore, a blight. Someone had to do something. Someone had to make them understand. She didn't explicitly confess to setting the fire in that venomous, self-serving tirade, but her words painted a chillingly clear picture of her motive, her mindset, her profound and twisted sense of entitlement. It was more than enough. Brenda Hoskins was arrested later that day by Oak Haven police officers and charged with felony arson, aggravated destruction of property with a value exceeding $25,000, making it a higher-grade felony and, crucially, a hate crime enhancement due to the clear evidence of targeting a disabled individual's essential life-altering equipment. The news of her arrest and the shocking details of her crime spread through Oak Haven like wildfire and then amplified by social media and local news outlets throughout the entire city and beyond. Local woman burns disabled boy's wheelchair. Boy's father is city fire chief. The headlines were sensational, the public outrage palpable and overwhelming. The Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association Board, which had previously dismissively brushed off Mike's legitimate concerns about Hoskins's escalating harassment, now found themselves engulfed in a firestorm of public condemnation and potential legal liability. At an emergency community meeting, packed to the rafters, with angry residents, disability advocates, and numerous media representatives, the visibly shaken HOA president attempted to distance the association from Hoskins's heinous actions, weakly calling her a rogue individual whose views did not represent the community. It was then that Mike Ramirez, attending not just as a grieving, outraged father, but in his full resplendent uniform as the city's fire chief, rose to address the assembly. He had said to Sarah just before leaving, "I'm just one father, Sarah. I don't know if I can win against her, against this kind of hate, this kind of entrenched ignorance." But now, seeing the faces in the crowd, seeing Leo watching him with a mixture of fear and hope, something shifted within him. He stood at the podium, not with Leo's earlier broken words, but with a new, formidable authority. He spoke not of revenge, though the desire for it burned fiercely within him, but of responsibility of the insidious pattern of escalating harassment that had been ignored, trivialized, and thereby enabled. He spoke of the profound, urgent need for communities to actively protect their most vulnerable members, not ostracize or demonize them for their differences. He laid out, with heartbreaking clarity, the devastating emotional and practical impact of Hoskins's hateful actions on his son, on his entire family. And then his voice changed, taking on the resonant timbre of command that his firefighters knew so well. He unpinned his gleaming fire chief's badge from his uniform. This act of arson, he stated, his voice ringing with an authority that silenced the room, was not just a malicious prank, not just destruction of property. It was a violent crime fueled by prejudice, by hatred. It was an act of domestic terrorism against a child. And it highlights a dangerous, insidious complacency that can take root in any community when superficial aesthetics are prioritized over human dignity, compassion, and basic safety. He held up his badge, the symbol of his office, of his oath to protect. As fire chief of this city, I have witnessed the devastating consequences of fire countless times. I have carried children from burning buildings. I have seen families lose everything. But this fire, his voice cracked with emotion for a fleeting moment. This fire was different. This was personal. This was an attack on the very soul of my child, on his right to exist freely and without fear in his own neighborhood. He then placed his badge firmly on the podium. Therefore, I am announcing tonight that my department, in conjunction with the mayor's office, the city council, the Oak Haven Police Department, and state and national disability advocacy groups, will be spearheading a countywide and eventually, I hope, a statewide initiative. We will review and reform all homeowners association policies regarding accommodations for disabled residents. We will implement mandatory comprehensive training for all HOA boards and management companies on AD compliance, conflict resolution, disability sensitivity, and hate crime prevention and recognition. We will establish a dedicated task force to investigate and prosecute hate-motivated property crimes against vulnerable individuals with the full force of the law. We will change the culture of indifference that allowed this to happen. His words were met with a stunned, profound silence, then a deafening wave of applause that went on and on. The HOA board members looked pale, visibly shaken. One resident, a lawyer, shouted, "The fire chief himself, she messed with the wrong family." The era of unchecked petty busybody tyranny in Oakhaven and potentially across the entire county was demonstrably, irrevocably over. Brenda Hoskins had lit a fire, but Michael Ramirez was about to unleash a controlled burn that would cleanse the landscape. The legal process against Brenda Hoskins was swift and merciless. Confronted with the overwhelming forensic evidence, the eyewitness testimony of Mrs. Henderson, the damning security footage, and the articulate, heartbreaking testimony of a still traumatized but remarkably composed Leo Ramirez, she was found guilty on all charges by a jury that deliberated for less than an hour. The judge's sentencing remarks were scathing, excoriating her for her profound cruelty, her calculated malice, and her utter lack of remorse. She received a significant prison sentence, the maximum allowed under the statutes, with the hate crime enhancement adding considerably to her time behind bars. As she was led from the courtroom, she tried to flee a desperate last-ditch attempt at escape, but was quickly firmly apprehended by court deputies, a final, pathetic display of her broken arrogance. The Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association, facing immense public pressure, widespread condemnation, and the very real threat of crippling lawsuits, not only fully funded a state-of-the-art replacement wheelchair for Leo, one even more advanced, more responsive, and at Leo's specific request, flame red, but also issued a profound public apology to the Ramirez family and the entire community. They eagerly, almost desperately cooperated with Fire Chief Ramirez's sweeping reform initiatives, becoming, ironically, a model for other HOAs in the county. Across the county and then the state, HOA bylaws were scrutinized, challenged, and rewritten. New robust training programs were developed and implemented. The Ramirez reforms, as they became informally known in legal and advocacy circles, set a new higher standard for how communities addressed issues of disability discrimination and harassment. Fire departments in other jurisdictions began to look at arson against disabled individuals' property through a new, more critical lens. Leo, with the incredible resilience of youth and the unwavering fierce love and support of his family and a now mobilized community, slowly healed from the profound trauma of that day. His new flame-red wheelchair became not a symbol of victimhood, but a beacon of his survival, his spirit, and the community's hard-won capacity for change and redemption. He even found his voice, speaking with quiet courage and unexpected eloquence at a local disability awareness event, sharing his story, his words making his father prouder than words could ever say. "I just wanted to play like everyone else." He'd said, his voice clear and strong. "I still don't understand why she hated me, why she hated my chair, but I'm not going to let her win. I'm going to keep rolling." Yorsa, Fire Chief Michael Ramirez continued to serve his city. His profound dedication to safety and justice now deepened, sharpened, and rendered even more potent by his family's harrowing ordeal. He had faced fire in its myriad destructive forms countless times throughout his career. But this fire, the one that had threatened his son, the one that had sought to extinguish his child's independence and spirit, had forged in him a new unyielding resolve to ensure that no child, no vulnerable individual would ever again have to see their lifeline, their freedom, their very identity go up in flames due to the corrosive forces of hatred, ignorance, and petty malice. The ashes of Leo's electric blue wheelchair had in the end given rise to a stronger, wiser, more compassionate community, a lasting testament to the enduring, unconquerable power of a father's love and a fire chief's unwavering, solemn commitment to protect and serve, not just from flames, but from the darkness in the human heart.